Welcome to What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. Andrew is president and CEO of Swan Capital. He has offices in Pensacola and Mobile and Daphne, Alabama. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer, and as you know, our national debt clock is increasing by the second. It's mind-boggling when you go to that website. And as a country, we have reached $28 trillion of national debt. So what does that debt mean for those of us heading into retirement or already there? And is the government taking proper action? That's going to be our focus today on What Your Money Would Say. And Andrew has invited a very special guest today, David Ditch. He is a research associate at the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. Here's Andrew's phone number, 800-848-8768. 800-848-8768. You'll need that number today, and you'll understand why if you want to get on Andrew's calendar for a complimentary appointment. 800-848-8768. And, of course, you can find us online anytime at swan-capital.com. First of all, big hello to you, Andrew.
Hey, glad to be with you today, Lou Ann. I'm really excited about today's show. I mean, everyone's on their mind is thinking about the debt. I mean, with the stimulus checks arriving, you think, can the debt clock continue spiraling up is what's on everyone's mind. So I'm really excited to talk about today's topic.
Right. Me too. And then David, welcome to our show.
Glad to be here.
David, you are a research associate at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., and you aren't a stranger to radio because you've made a lot of appearances all across the country. Plus, you've been featured. Your work has been featured on FoxBusiness.com, the Los Angeles Times, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and a lot of other publications. So we're really excited to have you with us today.
I'm excited.
Okay, so let's get on with the Heritage Foundation, okay, and where you work. It's been ranked number one in the world for its impact on public policy, and that's very, very impressive. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the Heritage Foundation and their mission.
The Heritage Foundation was founded several decades ago in response to the fact that lots of members of Congress and lots of legislative staffers were struggling to know what the right response was on a variety of issues. The Heritage Foundation, as a think tank, is designed to provide support on a comprehensive range of policy dilemmas. We promote free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense.
Okay, I love that. So, all right,
I like that whole list.
I do too. It's wonderful, and we need you. I'm so happy that this formed.
Yes.
How long has the Heritage Foundation been around?
Oh my gosh, I always struggle to remember the exact dates. I want to say we were founded in the early 80s.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Great.
So we have invited you here because we want to talk about the national debt. I want you to give us a brief history lesson, if you don't mind, David.
So the national debt, in terms of the economy, which is the most important measuring stick, was fairly low until World War I, and it spiked for obvious reasons, and then it dipped back down. It spiked again a little bit during the Great Recession, and then a lot during World War II. It set what remains, frankly, the record in terms of the economy. But then after World War II, it plunged at, frankly, a rate that I still have a hard time believing. Ultimately, we grew out of it, and it has gone through a period of a few steady increases starting around the early 1980s. And unfortunately, it's looking like it could increase from here on out.
You know, that's so sad because we all know how to be diligent with our money, but why doesn't the government know how? We're taught, to spend within our means. So if you had to give our country a grade right now on how we're handling the national debt, what would be the score?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's an F. It's just, it would be one thing if we had a lot of debt, but we were on the right course in the future. Things were set up with our programs and our taxes, but right now things are set up to only get worse year after year after year.
And then COVID didn't help, right?
No, COVID did not help. The federal government has spent about $45,000 per household on the additional bills, whether you call it relief or stimulus. And frankly, the vast majority of houses have not experienced $45,000 in losses as a result of the pandemic.
Wow.
So that's the thing. Was it that necessary to give us that much? I feel like they were kind of just being nice to us.
But would you really call it being nice to us when the bill is being passed on the future generations and when it's
Right.
our money to begin with?
Oh, wow. That's so true. So let's talk about that. How does this affect the everyday citizen, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I think what it does is, like you were saying, it burdens them with that future debt, and that future generation is eventually going to have to pay for it. And there's really only basically two solutions. I mean, for the federal government is first is what you touched on, David, is outgrowing the national debt. But if our GDP remains so slow and we're not in a time of expansion like after World War II, we can't outpace that debt compared to our income unless we get GDP revved up. And again, if we keep on sending jobs elsewhere and we don't have a huge manufacturing base and we're not at the cutting edge of technology, that's going to be a struggle. And the second way, of course, is actually making more money. I mean, just like if you were in debt, you would either want your income to outpace your debt, or you would have to start cut expenses or start making more income. And for the government to make more income means they have to charge us more taxes. And so as the individual citizen, and that's why I work with retirees, is saying we need to be prepared for potentially more taxes. And the way that you can prepare for it, and what we don't want to do is complain about the national debt. We don't want to complain about taxes. We want to plan around taxes. And so that's why we work with our clients and build basically IRA exit strategies of unwinding their 401ks, their IRAs that have never been taxed, basically frozen income, and paying the taxes now while they're historically low, and shifting them to tax-free assets like, i.e., Roth IRA that grows tax-free. And Luann, I've had so many clients lately and families that been had all these misconceptions that they've been awoken up to, that they thought that I could only put $7,000 into a Roth IRA. And you can do more than that through Roth conversions. I've had families that said, I didn't even think I could have a Roth in retirement. And I say, of course you can. You don't have to have earned income to put money into a Roth IRA via conversion. And so there's these misconceptions because we have a very complicated tax law for every United States citizen. And so that's why I think it's really important to keep the national debt in focus to your economy and start planning towards higher taxes in the future by lowering your tax rate on all of your money in the future.
And Andrew, we have something right now that we can put in the hands of our listeners, because taxes can be so confusing. And we have a little tax booklet and it can help them simplify taxes, right?
We absolutely do. I mean, taxes can be a very complex topic. So anytime we can get you a resource that simplifies your tax decisions as a retiree, we want to get that in your hands. And so all you have to do is go to what your money would say. So whatyourmoneywouldsay.com, and then put /tax. So whatyourmoneywouldsay.com/tax. And when you do that, it's going to give you a PDF of a really nice report that talks about the ways as a retiree that you can make more tax-wise decisions as you're 5 years, 10 years out from retirement.
And we just thank you so much for joining us today. Let me give you Andrew's phone number as well. It's 800-848-8768. He is a retirement financial advisor, so you may call him, set up an appointment, and go in and see him complimentary. That first visit is complimentary, 800-848-8768. We just thank you so much for joining us today. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair and our special guest, David Ditt. He is from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Real quick, Andrew, we've had Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell on our show before. He even said in the first quarter of this year that reducing the federal budget is going to be necessary at some point in the future. But right now, achieving a full economic recovery should be the priority. What are your thoughts on how the government is handling our money strategies?
Well, I'm glad it's not my job. I mean, that's a losing proposition each way because it's always going to be political, and you're never going to make the perfect decision. I will say though, in the last few years, I've been armchair quarterbacking their decisions, and when we saw that the economy was starting to slow down pre-COVID, and I've been saying for years that they should start raising interest rates because if we fell into a financial crisis or if we had a black swan event, i.e. like COVID, we needed something, a life preserver to be able to throw out to, actually help stimulate the economy. But the problem is we were asking for interest rates to continually go lower. I understood where Trump was coming from, that he wanted to stay competitive with other countries that had negative or low interest rates. But the issue is if we had a financial crisis, which was fast approaching in March, we would have had a larger life preserver to throw out to the economy. But now, since we're kind of at our backs are up against the wall with low interest rates, that's why they had to do stimulus checks and pay the PPP loans because they didn't have all the tools in their tool belt that they once did in 2008.
Right. David, let me ask you this. Tell us the burden that it's going to be for every citizen if this national debt continues to be over $28 trillion.
Well, first of all, we have to break these numbers down because no one can actually wrap their head around what 28 trillion is. I mean, is it the number of grains of sand on a beach? $28 trillion broken down is about $225,000 in debt for every single household. It's a huge chunk of money. It's bad enough. Mm-hmm. But with the additional spending that's being passed this year and with the growing spending that we expect in long-term programs like Social Security and Medicare, debt will likely be around $200,000 per person just 30 years from now.
Oh my.
And at that level, just paying for the interest on the debt will consume about 1 month of economic activity every year.
That is so scary. Very, very scary. And Andrew, if the government increases taxes in the future, like we know they're going to have to do, what can we do about it?
Well, I know a lot of clients, and I wouldn't consider them conspiracy theorists, clients or families that I talk to on a daily basis. They worry about, is the government going to have to confiscate my money to pay off that debt in the future? If, we're indebted $200,000 per person one day, are they going to look to me and my retirement accounts to try to pay for it? And outright, I truly don't believe they'll confiscate your money, but they will confiscate it by raising taxes. And that's one way to look at it, is if your IRAs and 401ks, for example, have never been taxed, that means that Uncle Sam owns 10 to 20% of your IRA and your 401k. Now, you may not see it on your statement, but they own 10 to 20% of your IRA or 401k. And what's sad is we're telling our grandchildren and our children to pile as much money as they can into an IRA and 401k so that they can potentially pay taxes at a higher rate in the future. And the issue is if all they do is raise the tax bill by 5% across the board, and you're taking money out in retirement, that means they own 5% more of your IRA and 401k. So I don't think they'll confiscate your IRA or 401k, but by raising taxes, in essence, you're handing them more of your life savings.
So Andrew, we got to take a quick break. Give your phone number out, please.
Absolutely. So if you're listening, you say, Andrew, I would love to learn more about that IRA exit strategy of how I can start shifting to more tax-free investments. I encourage you to take us up on our sleep study. We don't take care of sleep apnea equipment. What we help people do, and it's our goal at Swan Capital, to help families sleep well at night. And that's what Swan stands for. And so what we do is we sit down with you and say, what is your tax strategy of trying to reduce your taxes over your lifetime? And the unique thing here at Swan Capital is we have a CPA and an estate planning attorney in our office that can help you answer those questions. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768.
And we thank you for listening. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. We'll be right back with more from David Ditch right after this. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. Andrew is president and CEO at Swan Capital. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer, and today we're so happy to welcome David Ditch. He's from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the national debt today, and it's a little alarming, to every tax-paying American that the debt is over $28 trillion. David, you just said, it's about $225,000 per household. So I want to talk about the impact that this can have on the future of our country and its competitiveness.
Yeah, America's economy and military are the backbone of the free world. Other nations count on us to buy their goods, to sell them ours, and to ensure global stability so that we can avoid the kinds of destructive wars and conflicts that have hobbled mankind for millennia. But if the federal government continues down a path of financial ruin, we risk everything. We could hobble or cripple the economy with debt and taxes, lose our ability to afford a strong national defense, and cause other nations to look elsewhere for leadership. And unfortunately, elsewhere typically means China.
Oh, dear. Yeah. Now, David, you've been a research analyst at the Heritage Foundation for about 3 years now. And prior to that, you had some great experience in Washington. You were budget analyst for the Senate Budget Committee, and you also worked on the Senate Small Business Committee, too. So you are in Washington. You see firsthand the changes in the fiscal policy all the time. If the government continues to dig deeper, what can citizens do to shield themselves?
Really, one of the key things that people can do to shield themselves is to make sure that they have saved money in ways that can minimize their future tax liability. For instance, since I graduated from college, I've been investing in a Roth IRA. And over that time, my investments have grown, as has the rest of the stock market. But then when I want to utilize that that money when I retire, I'm going to get the benefit of having it be tax-free.
Right. Andrew, you want to chime in on this? What
Absolutely.
do we need to be doing?
I think the other thing that as fixed income investors that many retirees are is they're in bonds, they're in CDs, they're in safe investments because they feel uncertain about these economic times as well as the fiscal policy of the country. And what you don't want to do is be left behind. Like he was sharing, is the stock market does keep on going up, and it is one of the biggest powerful creators of wealth we've ever seen is the stock market. And what it's done is kept up with inflation and most of the time outpaced inflation, that in real estate. And so we want to invest in asset classes that outperform inflation, especially if we see inflation creep up because of maybe bad fiscal policy that creates inflation. And so we have to remember that having a diversified portfolio of some stock market investments, maybe some real estate, that will help us stay ahead of inflation. But again, for those who are only on the sidelines in CDs and fixed investments, unfortunately, those American citizens are who are going to actually take the brunt of inflation rising in the future.
David, what do you think about how this will affect our currency, the U.S. currency? Do you think the U.S. dollar will always be the world's currency?
Right now, investors and governments around the world assume that our dollar and our debt are stable investments. The demand for U.S. dollar and federal debt is a virtuous cycle. It helps keep the dollar strong, and it helps interest rates on the federal debt stay low. But we're taking this for granted. We keep using the Federal Reserve, we keep using the Treasury as a shortcut around making tough policy choices. If we go too far in issuing excessive amounts of debt or in printing too many dollars, investors will lose confidence, which will drive inflation and which will drive interest rates on our debt up. And that could impose big costs on the country.
Very good. So, all right, Andrew, let's give out your phone number and any other pertinent information. We have a lot of things that we could have our listeners download. What would you like to offer them?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is if you're one of those fixed income investors and you look around and CD rates are now 1% for a 5-year CD on average we're seeing, and sometimes even lower for a 5-year CD. And you think, I don't want to tie up my money up for 5 years at 1%. Is there a way to do better? The nice thing here at Swan Capital is that we're an independent financial firm, which means we shop all the financial institutions to make sure that we're finding the best interest rates for our clients. And sometimes that means in a low interest rate environment where a family can only find 1% out there at their local institution, we can find sometimes 2%, 3%, sometimes as much as 3 times more than what they're seeing in their local institution. And that's because we're independent. It's like going to a Ford dealership, Luann, and expecting them to tell you about a Chevy or Toyota. You're only going to hear about what they can offer. And so if you're listening and you are one of those fixed income investors and you want to do better, give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768. And we can share with you what opportunities are available today.
And then let me also add that you can head to Andrew's website for a wealth of wonderful information there. Swan-capital.com, Capital. You'll see the monthly market recap that they have on there every month, a blog post, Staying the Course, that Andrew actually writes. It's a beautiful new website, and you can head there and find out some great information about Andrew and his awesome team at Swan Capital. And we thank you for listening. This is What Your Money Would Say. I'm Luann Fulmer. Today we're talking about the national debt. And we, of course, we have a special guest, David Ditch. He's from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. And the foundation develops solutions to some of our biggest issues in America, like, creating jobs, improving our economy, and even securing our borders and making healthcare more affordable. So it's a great mission, and it's a great foundation. And David, you do work on behalf of the American people, not for any special interest group, any political party, anything like that. In your opinion, how large can the national debt really get? I feel like we're just blowing up this huge balloon, and it's about ready to pop.
It's important to put things in context. National debt was briefly larger than the size of the economy in the aftermath of World War II, but we grew out of it. And also, federal spending rapidly declined as a share of the economy, which again really helped us to pay it off. We're back at about that level today, only we haven't faced a crisis on the scale or the length of World War II and the Great Depression combined. And unfortunately, things are projected to only get worse. About 30 years from now, projections have us with debt to GDP at about 200%, or the national debt being twice the size of the economy. And that's before we take into consideration a lot of the spending that's either passed this year or is being proposed this year. Unfortunately, the leadership in Washington is obsessed with the notion of spending even more money, and that will put tremendous upward pressure on increasing taxes.
Wow. I mean, that's hard to fathom that we, in relation to GDP, are acting as if we already went through a World War II or a Great Depression. I mean,
Right.
that's crazy to comprehend.
And Andrew, you and I always discuss the importance of having a tax strategy for our retirement money. I want you to explain other ways that Americans can save on taxes, just to be helpful here.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have a CPA in our office, and she talks to clients all the time about QCDs, qualified charitable distributions. And what she and I do is we help clients take money directly out of their IRA and send it directly to their church or charity. And by doing that, they pay zero taxes up to $100,000 a year you can take out of your IRA via a QCD. And why is that impactful? Well, because many people are taking the standard deduction, and it's sad that they don't really get any benefit from their generous giving. But if you were to take the QCD out of your IRA, you would get the tax deduction and pay zero taxes on your money that is in the IRA that has never been taxed. So the first thing is QCDs. The second is we have talked with a lot of clients who, when they retire, start a part-time business and they have tax deductions because of their business. Third is tax diversification. We talk all the time about our investments being diversified, but we don't talk about our taxes being diversified. And we want both of those in retirement. And then the last thing is make sure that it is fine trying to save money by filing your taxes, when you're doing the tax preparation. But having a CPA or a tax attorney on your team, those are the individuals, in addition to myself, that are trying to make sure that you reduce your tax liability, not for last year alone, but for the rest of your life. How do we reduce your tax liability? And so that's what we do day in and day out here at Swan Capital.
David, let me ask you this. How will this national debt affect our national budget? And then a second part of that question would be, what would be the threat to the United States if global interest did start going up?
The core cost of the national debt is servicing it. It's paying interest on the debt. Right now, the cost of managing the national debt is a couple percent of GDP per year. That's about the level it's been for several decades. The reason why it's been low, why it's this low today, is that interest rates have been declining. The problem is that interest rates now have literally nowhere to go but up. The Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan analysis group, estimates that interest rates will go up in the future, not dramatically. But the problem is that it doesn't need to be a dramatic increase in interest rates when the debt is as high as it is. They estimate that by the time you get to the year 2050, it will cost us 8% of GDP, that's about 1 month of economic product per year, just to service the debt. And when we get to that point, that's going to put enormous pressure on the federal government to increase taxes to historically unseen levels and to sacrifice core national duties like maintaining a strong military.
All right, we are up against a break, guys. Andrew, let's give out your phone number again. You are offering a chance for people to come in and see you complimentary.
Absolutely. So if you want to learn more about those tax strategies like the QCD or, maybe starting a business, you can meet with our CPA and myself to talk through some of those strategies to try to reduce your tax liability over your lifetime. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768. And we look forward to spending an hour complimentary with you to answer and talk through all of those tax strategies.
And we still have a lot more to get to about our national debt with Andrew McNair and David Dish. So stick around for more of What Your Money Would Say. We're so glad to have you here with us today. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. Andrew is president and CEO at Swan Capital. He has offices in Pensacola and Mobile and Daphne, Alabama as well. Andrew's been a trusted leader in the financial services field, and every week he shares great strategies with you about retirement planning. Today, we have David Ditch on our show, and of course, he's with the Heritage Foundation. We're talking about the national debt. David, why don't you explain your role for us at the Heritage Foundation and the trends that you've been noticing?
So my role is to follow what's going on in the news, follow what's going on in Congress, and to provide timely analysis to the general public and to Congress. My focus is on fiscal policy, so that means taxes and spending. I also focus a lot on transportation and infrastructure, which is going to be a big issue this year. On the spending front, one trend that I noticed prior to COVID is that when we last had balanced budgets in the year 2000, federal spending was in line with taxes. Tax revenue has been fairly even within a very narrow range since the year 2000, but spending has really ticked up to the point where by 2019, despite the strong economy, we had a deficit of about $1 trillion, which is $3,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. If we had only increased spending from the year 2000 based on inflation and population growth, the budget would have been balanced even after the 2017 tax cuts. Right now, the best thing that legislators can do is to slow the growth of federal spending so that we can avoid a lot of the disastrous consequences that are looming in the future.
Which isn't really popular. If you're a senator and in your town there's a base and we're talking base closures, it doesn't help you get reelected. And unfortunately, that's the problem, is this greedy cycle of not wanting to, get kicked out of office, but to make the hard decisions.
And then, David, you mentioned something I kind of want to know a little bit more about. You said there's surely going to be more spending on transportation and our infrastructure. What do you mean by that?
Right now, there is a proposal that details will likely come out very soon that could spend $3 to $4 trillion. And the word that people are going to throw around is infrastructure. And people think about that as roads and bridges and, oh, that's great and wonderful. But then when you dig down underneath, actually infrastructure is going to be a small portion of that, maybe a third to a quarter. And then of that infrastructure project, a lot of that is going towards pie in the sky projects like high-speed rail or really wasteful and inefficient things like mass transit that only really works in New York City. And the end result is going to be lots of handouts to groups that, frankly, lean a bit left and not that much benefit to the average American for an extraordinarily high cost that we can't afford.
Right. Like you said, pie in the sky, Maybe we better watch it. Now, Andrew, of course, you've been working with retirees, helping them put a financial plan together, over the last decade and a half. Tell us where taxes fit into that financial plan, please.
Well, taxes are a huge section in every client's financial plan, and it should be for this very reason is if our federal government is not going to take care of their debts and their budgets, then that means that we have to have a larger section in our financial plan that has to do with taxes. And the problem is, and I'll pull back the curtain a little bit for you, is that financial advisors are technically not allowed to give tax advice. And the unique situation here at Swan Capital is that we have a CPA in our office who is eligible to give you tax advice. And I think that's so important when it comes to retirement. And some of those strategies that we talk with clients is we see clients that have maybe $80,000, $100,000, sometimes $300,000 just sitting in a checking and a money market. That's a taxable account, which means they've already paid taxes when they made those monies. And then when they put it into the checking and savings account, as they earn what little interest they do, they pay taxes a second time on the interest earned. And so what we share with clients is saying, why aren't you max funding your Roth TSP? Why aren't you max funding your Roth 401k and your Roth IRA 5 years before retirement? So in essence, what we're taking and doing is taking money from their left hand that's taxable and shifting it to tax-free investments so that they can get the benefit in retirement of having tax-free income. And that little small strategy can save families a large percentage that adds up over time.
And so we have something today that we can put in the hands of our listeners. It's a little report about taxes. Tell them about that.
We do. So when it comes to taxes can be very complicated. So any resources you can get would be fantastic. I know they didn't teach me a lot about taxes in high school or in college, really. So I encourage you to get this copy of this resource for you if you're 5 to 10 years out from retirement. So all you have to do to get it is go to whatyourmoneywouldSay.com/tax. And if you go to whatyourmoneywouldSay.com/tax, you can download that report and it will give you some really important things to think about with the tax considerations of your retirement.
All right. And also his phone number, you can call him and go in and see Andrew and his team at Swan Capital, 800-848-8768. First appointment's a complimentary appointment. He'd love to sit down with you and talk to you and answer questions you have. 800-848-8768. And this is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. And, of course, we're discussing our national debt today with David Ditch. David is from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. As Americans, we work our entire careers and we save and save for retirement. We put our money, in those 401ks, IRAs, tax-free Roth accounts, and we are counting on that money. But with this $1 trillion of debt that we have nationally, I think Americans are a little concerned about, what the government's going to do. Are they going to confiscate some of their retirement accounts? What would you say about that, David?
I would say that for as bad as things are, things have to get immeasurably worse before that would happen. Right now, the federal government is taking what I would consider to be more than enough money to fund our core national priorities, and it's spending much more than that, and spending is projected to go up. However, there are lots of ways the federal government can increase taxes in what one could consider to be a normal way, especially if you compare our situation to a situation like you see in Europe. In Europe, they have what are called value-added taxes, which are the equivalent of a national sales tax. That's a way that really hits a lot of families hard there. It increases the cost of living. It also allows those governments to rake in a lot of money. I would hate to see that happen here, but you would absolutely see something like that, or increases in income taxes, increases in investment taxes like capital gains, before you would see the confiscation of private property like retirement accounts, because that would be economic and political suicide.
Right. And Luann, I've heard all these conspiracy theories, but the truth is they don't have to confiscate your money. All they have to do is go back to the past and raise taxes. And we look at the top marginal tax bracket today, just to show you a quick trend. Today, the top marginal tax bracket is 37%. And people say, well, they confiscate my money. No, all they have to do is go back to historical standards, because the average for the last 100 years is nearly 60%. And it's been 90% 14 times in U.S. history. So if you start raising taxes significantly, no, you won't have to confiscate, the American people's money outright. You'll just do it slowly through taxes. And unfortunately, that's what we may see, is higher taxes in the future.
Right. I mean, we do talk about that all the time. And at Swan Capital, Andrew, you and your team help retirees plan out tax strategies for retirement. Strategies, right? You don't do their taxes.
We don't.
But
that's why we have a CPA. She does the tax preparation, but we do talk through tax strategies. And one tax strategy that I've heard many clients say, I didn't even think to ask. Clients have been putting money into their 401k, Luann, maybe for 10, 15, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then times change within their company, but they never get the notice that their company is now offering a Roth 401k. And now so many companies are offering that Roth 401k, but they never told their employees, or they never got the message or the memo. And so what you want to do is go back to your employer and say, hey, can I do a Roth 401k? And they'll say, yes, your match is still going to go to your traditional 401k, but you can put your money absolutely in a Roth 401k. The second thing we help clients do is try to avoid RMDs, required minimum distributions. At the age of 72, Uncle Sam's going to make you start taking money out of your IRAs and 401ks. But what they forget to tell you, that little disclosure in the bottom you never read, is people have heard of the RMDs, but they've never heard that when you take that money out of your IRA as an RMD, it cannot go into a Roth IRA. They want you to put it into something taxable, so that as it earns interest, you're going to pay taxes a second time. So if you are not 72 years old yet, you still have time. You have a window of opportunity to shift assets from IRAs and 401ks to something tax-free. And I would do it sooner than later, especially when we talk about the national debt on our show today.
And if anybody needs some advice on this, they can certainly come to you, Andrew.
That's right. And that's why we offer our 1-hour complimentary sleep study to help families, because it's our goal at Swan Capital to help you sleep well at night. And if you're staying up at night thinking about the national debt and you're thinking about tax rates in the future, that's no way to live your retirement. We need to sleep better at night. And by doing tax strategies to try to reduce your tax liability, that can give you a little bit more confidence.
All right. The phone number to call for a complimentary appointment, 800-848-8768. Again, 848-8768, 800 number. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair, David Ditch from the Heritage Foundation. We'll be right back with the rest of our show. Hi there, I'm Luann Fulmer here with Andrew McNair. You're listening to What Your Money Would Say. Today we're having a great discussion about federal spending and the national debt with David Ditch. David is a research analyst at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. And David, some of the government unfunded liabilities do include Social Security. That's a biggie for retirees, obviously. Should they be worried about those checks?
I think Americans should be worried about the program. I don't think retirees need to be worried about their checks. Unfortunately, the way Social Security has been designed, most people historically, since it started under FDR, have been receiving more in benefits than they pay into the system. Not an egregious amount, but it is added up over time. And the Social Security surplus that we were counting on to be here to pay for the benefits for the baby boom generation and for generations to come has been depleted to the point where it is going to run out of money in the next 10 to 15 years. Washington, D.C. is going to have to reckon with this. Now, because so many older Americans are regular voters, politicians are very sensitive to their needs. There's absolutely no way that Social Security cuts or checks are going to be reduced. However, the program, as it stands, is unsustainable. And one of the toughest policy challenges we face is striking the balance between making sure that retirees get the money that they put into the system and that they deserve, but also not having the system bankrupt future generations. There are ways we can reform the program to maintain the real value of current benefits while reducing the growth in spending on the program, not cutting spending, just reducing the growth in spending. We can do that. And if our politicians are responsible, we will do that.
That sounds positive, honestly. I'm happy to
and
hear
I
you
will
say that.
Luann, I'm happy to hear that too.
Yeah.
And, as boots on the ground, I should say, I hear from, those retirees every day, and I hear their worries about Social Security. And I've had many clients, just one yesterday, in fact, that said, I don't count on Social Security to be there. And I said, well, that may be a little bit too negative. I said, Social Security will be there. Now, will it be there in its present form? Maybe not. I mean, they can and will probably make changes. They may change retirement age to be, in your 70 would be the first starting date. Maybe they do something that drastic. Maybe they means tested in some ways. They can definitely change the benefit. Now, I will say that the government does have at least the integrity to typically grandfather people in. When we saw monumental changes during the Obama administration, we saw that things were grandfathered in if you got in before a certain date. And so for those do-it-yourself investors that are not staying up to date on Social Security changes and tax law changes, which happen all the time, it's a shame when something like that monumental change happens and people don't hear about it till after the fact, till after it's too late. And so I think it's really important to make sure that we stay up to date with tax law changes, Social Security changes, so you can get in there before the cutoff.
And another thing kind of looming over the heads of retirees with the federal government is Medicare. So I want you to talk about Medicare because you guys do planning, long-term planning for your retirees, please.
Absolutely. I mean, Medicare can be tricky. They label it in ABCs, but it's a lot more complicated than the ABCs I learned in school. And it can be costly, more than what families expect. Sometimes they think, I thought I paid into Social Security and Medicare. No, it's going to be not only your Medicare Part B premiums, but if you have certain income levels, I've had clients that luckily they have $200,000 a year in pensions. And they're shocked when they're paying $300 sometimes or more in Medicare premiums because their income is so high, it puts them into that Medicare income limit space where they're paying, they call it a penalty, I call it additional taxes. They're paying additionally for their Medicare.
And we always offer an appointment for retirees. If they have questions about this, let's give out your information again, please.
Absolutely. If you're turning age 65 and you need help getting through those ABCs and understanding how to apply for Medicare Part B or what Medicare supplement makes sense for you, we can help you with that Medicare supplement. It's one of the things that we look at in every client's financial plan. So be sure to give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768. 8768.
And this is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. Andrew is president and CEO at Swan Capital, and he helps retirees every single day. This is what he does. He's here to help you. Swan Capital is an independent firm, and they'll find solutions for you. They're not here to sell you anything. They're here to find solutions and help you come up with a written plan for retirement. So we have a very special guest on our show, David Ditch. He's from the Heritage Foundation, and we've been discussing how to plan for retirement accordingly with this looming national debt. David, looking at the trillions, the over 28 trillions of dollars that we're in debt, it's kind of depressing, I think, for everybody. Is there any good news that you can give us that we can hang on to for hope?
The fact of the matter is America has overcome bigger challenge than this many times in its history, thanks to the hard work of the American people and the strong core values embedded in the Constitution. But we're not entitled to overcoming today's or future challenges. It's going to take more hard work. I firmly believe that if legislators learn that American citizens will hold them accountable if they're financially irresponsible, they will become more responsible with our money. We did see that briefly with the Tea Party movement. Spending was brought under control, deficits came down, and I believe that that can happen again if we keep up the pressure.
Do we need to sign petitions?
Well, I mean, what gets measured gets managed. And that's no different when it comes to the federal government. If we focus on that and we hold our politicians who work for us, I mean, the government is, again, they work for us. They're not our protectors. They're not our saviors. They work for us. And so we need to hold them to their job and their position.
It's kind of hard for Americans to relate to what those billions and trillions of dollars can mean. How can we wrap our head around that?
So one way I like to look at things is to take $1 billion and break that down. And if you're talking about a federal program, you almost always start at $1 billion these days. To get $1 billion in the economy, which is where the government has to go to get money, you need to take 20,000 people making $50,000 a year. Now let's think about what one person making $50,000 a year goes through. They're getting up in the morning, they're going to work, they're putting in that 9 to 5 or maybe that 8 to 5, going home, getting up the next day, doing it again for an entire year. And you're doing that for 20,000 people just to get to $1 billion.
Wow.
If you scale that up to $1 trillion, you're talking about 20 million people. And right now, a lot of leaders in Washington, D.C. are throwing the word trillion around like it's nothing, but there are real costs involved.
Well, I can't verify this accuracy, but David, I actually saw a meme the other day that said, $2 trillion, like a $2 trillion package of stimulus and like one of the new acts. You think $2 trillion, wrapping your head around that. If you take the 550th richest people in the world and you total all of their net worth, it sometimes doesn't even reach $2 trillion. And to me, that's hard to fathom.
Wow.
That, some of the richest people in the world, if you total all their wealth, would not equal $2 trillion because it's so much money to put our minds around.
Absolutely. And one of the misnomers is that you could confiscate the money of someone like Bill Gates all at once and then just redistribute it, but you can't. This money, the value that these people have is tied up in things like stocks that they can't liquidate overnight. So the idea that these handful of wealthy people could save the country overnight, it doesn't work that way.
Well, it's crazy. I mean, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, $100 billion net worth. Well, 100 billion is not 1 trillion. You still need a lot more. And there's not 10, Jeff Bezos. There's not 10 Bill Gates. And so that's why you take the 550, richest people in the world. And now you're starting to get to 2 trillion. And that's just really hard to fathom. And so that's why we have to be very serious about, being prudent with the federal budget.
Any
Absolutely.
last words, gentlemen?
I think that Congress has shown that it will not be financially responsible unless the American people force them to be. And the public needs to be aware of these problems and they need to hold their leaders accountable.
I think that's a great final note. What I'll say is that remember, the federal government is not your protector. They're not our savior. They work for us. And the best way to help is to start with your own personal economy and manage your finances prudently. Teach your children and grandchildren to save even better than you do. I mean, you look at someone like China, a country like China, that average savings rate can be as high as 20%, and ours maybe is 6%. We need to get back to the basics of living below our means. And if we all start to do that, maybe our federal government will do that too. And we need to start saving for our retirement and maybe starting another business. We used to be, the American dream was starting a business, and we shouldn't have to wait for immigrants to come in to have that spirit in their gut to start a business. You can, even in retirement, you can start a business. And all of that equates to bringing value to the marketplace, which grows our GDP. And like David talked about earlier, usually when it comes to national debt, we've outgrown ourselves out of the national debt. We haven't really paid it off, but we usually just outgrow ourselves. And we can do that again because the American people are very strong. So as I wrap up, I want to again thank David for coming on our show. Thank you so much.
Yes, David.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for listening to What Your Money Would Say. Again, join us next week as we help you unravel the right things that you need to do for a successful retirement. Give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768.